All right, so my name is John Thompson, and the topic that I wrote about for this paper is practically so in class we learned about Miroff's theory about the presidential spectacle. My paper pretty much analyzes that spectacle through the presidencies of Barack Obama and Donald Trump. And the reason why is because in between 1988 and today is the existence of social media primarily, and basically how social media transformed the presidential spectacle, right? And I'm going to be looking at my notes so that I am on track with the conversation and presentation I want to give today. So without further ado, let's just jump straight into it. The first thing that we are going to discuss is practically the context that we live in today. That's what my paper started off with, right? So it pretty much comes with understanding what does it mean to be the president of the United States, right? That's what this entire class is about, the American presidency. And we understood that the president must have good rhetoric. A president must have good leadership, must be able to make quick policy decisions and handle a vast array of information. But they can also sell that information to the country the way they want to and the way that they see best. And what the political scientist Michael Miroff pretty much tried to explain to us is that a presidential spectacle is when a president takes all that information and tries to sell it to the American public on behalf of his agenda. But today we live in a completely different media environment. Back then, they were under the constant cycle of cable news, right? So the president could have, let's say, a ribbon cutting ceremony. It would go on cable news, but now we live in the age of social media where people primarily hear about the news first on social media before they even see the cable TV not podcast, but cable TV reactions and panelists on CNN or Fox News, right? So the question that comes, and this is pretty much what originated my paper, is given that social media is where the American public, the American viewer, lives, how does Miroff's theory uphold or fall necessarily against that, right? So before we move on, let's just understand what Miroff's presidential spectacle was pretty much arguing. Understand that he was arguing that while, yes, the presidential spectacle is a moment to educate the public, it was primarily used to educate the public in a certain way, to make them passive viewers rather than actual participants in the policies that the president is making or our democracy and the civic engagement that we have here in the United States as a whole. And my paper, for the most beginning part, kind of dives into that because it talks mostly about presidents like John F. Kennedy, right? Presidents like Ronald Reagan. These were presidents who were known to really, put on a good speech, a good spectacle that everybody could watch and view and say, that's amazing, I can't look away. But when you get into the presidencies of Barack Obama and the presidents of Donald Trump, as I'm going to explain, that begins to change. That begins to transform because, believe it or not, social media in our day and age, it doesn't primarily allow, people to be passive viewers, actually. But we're going to dive into that, right? So let's first start with the presidency of Barack Obama. That's how I have it here for my notes, and that's the way I'm going to deliver it to you all. So with the presidency of Barack Obama, not only was he, a major consequential president, he was the first black president, but he was also one of the first presidents to really hold office as social media platforms took off. And what I mean by social media platforms is Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. All those platforms really primarily took off once President Obama got into office. In fact, he used some of that. This isn't in my paper, but during the 2009 campaign for the presidency, from that transition from 2008 to 2009 of him becoming president, he really used social media with his campaign Twitter handle. And that's how a lot of people got to associate him with social media or being the tech savvy president. No thanks to Bill Clinton, who sent the first email, though. So that's the critical argument we're making, though, because social media is a reactive place, right? It's not really a place where a viewer can be passive. They're going to be reactive, as in liking it, commenting it, resharing it, or just feeling motivated to recreate it and then also possibly document themselves, right? Reacting to that. And it's way quicker than cable TV. And that's primarily the argument that, I'm going to be making throughout this entire presentation, is that social media is so fast, it's so quick, and the presidency has to be able to respond to that and utilize that with his presidential spectacles that he wishes to have and to occur, right? So under the presidency of Obama, he created what we like to call, or that I'm going to call, active participants in Miroff's theory. So that's the first block down for Miroff, right? I'm not arguing against him. I'm just saying how it transformed, right? So that's the first block down. Miroff argued that viewers would be passive because of presidential spectacles. But with social media and Obama's presidential spectacles, they were not passive, they were active participants. The first example I'll use of that was about the 2011 debt ceiling crisis, right? So Obama didn't just address the nation on his stance for the debt crisis. He basically told citizens to get involved. In fact, he even targeted Republican lawmakers through social media, saying, hey, you need to go contact this @Twitter handle, right? You need to get in their comment section. Everything they post, you need to tell them, hey, we need to pass a debt resolution, right? He encouraged them to call members of Congress also through social media. So instead of just giving a national address saying, my fellow Americans, this is what we need to do for the budget, he used social media to be the presidential spectacle. The spectacle itself was the reaction between everyday citizens and official governmental legislators' accounts, right? That was a presidential spectacle because for weeks, that's what the media talked about. They talked about citizens engaging with their lawmakers. Conservative media outlets said that the president was, making people harass them, while liberal outlets were saying that, hey, this is proof that Americans want change and Americans want this issue solved, right? And that's pretty much for the 2011 debt ceiling crisis what I meant in my paper by that. Because in the past, a speech would have had to try to accomplish that goal. And it would be more so just the president outlining what he would like to see versus, creating his own foot soldiers. And that's pretty much what the presidential spectacle in terms of active participation allows the president primarily to do. And that was started by the presidency of Barack Obama. Barack Obama also was able to upload his speeches at any time through platforms like YouTube, right? So before you had cable TV broadcasting, right? Broadcasting in itself, that means it's airing at a certain time, at a certain place live, right? With YouTube, not actually the case. You could, stream and it would be up there for hours on end, and it's up to the viewer to watch it themselves, right? So, the public isn't just receiving information, right? They can decide how much it matters by the view count and how much it spreads by how many times they reshare it. It's no longer fixed like cable TV was, right? And the last example I primarily used in my paper was Obama's use of Twitter town halls. That in itself should shock you for the presidential spectacle, because a town hall was usually controlled, moderated debates with companies like ABC or CNN or Fox, right? And you would have the president come in, already know the moderated questions. But with a Twitter town hall, it's live. Anybody can join. The spectacle in itself was the fact that the president didn't know what was going to be asked, right? He didn't know how it was going to be asked. He had to choose from the comment section what questions he was going to answer. That is a major transition, because not only, the viewer with cable TV had to actually watch debate, watch random citizens question the president. No, this time you personally can log in and ask President Obama a question through his Twitter town halls. And it was also just a great way for a president to put on a spectacle so he can appear transparent and democratic and, have a sense of all the issues, able to answer all these random comment sections in a funny way. It was a presidential spectacle in itself, but it was done because active participants in our democracy had to participate for it to work. Primarily, the key point that I really want to stress through this presentation about my paper in terms of the Obama presidency is that the Obama presidency used social media to create active participants, while Miroff's 1988 theory under cable TV tells us that the presidential spectacle is going to do nothing but create passive viewers. Obama used social media in his spectacles and got interactive viewers. Okay? And I think that's pretty much it for the Obama presidency. I'm going to use the rest of our time to primarily talk about the Trump presidency. Now, while Obama may have been one of the first presidents to use social media with his presidential office, there is no doubting that Donald J. Trump really used social media with his presidency. Almost all his decisions were announced through Twitter during his first presidency, and now as we see through Truth Social, right? And believe it or not, his tweets were the presidential spectacle. Primarily, once Donald J. Trump puts out something on social media, it gets to the media headlines over and over and over and over again, right? So in the television era, the presidential spectacle happened on TV. But in Donald Trump's era, it happened on social media and it was talked about on TV. Cycles after cycles. And the difference here is that Trump used a technique where he would constantly keep tweeting throughout the day, right? He doesn't normally stop. And he would tweet about different topics. He would say some things that could be perceived as insensitive by certain communities. And that in itself allows him to change the narrative. So he could do one presidential spectacle, right? And what I mean by that is one tweet, right? One tweet that would go so viral, it's basically a spectacle. By the time you're analyzing that one, he's already made another one. So what this allows him to do is to kind of, clog up the American public's memory about what he's saying and everything. And one of Miroff's strongest points against the presidential spectacle was that if it goes wrong, it's talked about nonstop, and it can almost even ruin a presidency. With President Donald Trump and the algorithms and timestamps of social media, that is not the case, because so long as he keeps tweeting, the media is going to keep talking. And if he's tweeting about different things, they're going to be talking about different things, so on and so on and so on. Another part about the Donald Trump's presidency in terms of the presidential spectacle is that with cable TV, the presidential spectacle was a one-man story, right? Whatever the president said, that was the narrative. With Donald J. Trump, he has allowed echo chambers to exist, right? So if you agree with him, you're primarily going to listen to that narrative, right? And those commentators on social media about what he posted on social media. And then you have those that are going to listen to the opposite, right? So it divides the American public. So it's still the same speech, right? It's still the same tweet, but it gets two different reactions, two different viewpoints, two different narratives, right? So it goes against what the presidential spectacle was originally trying to accomplish. Is that a president has information, he wants to sell it to the American public, but with all these echo chambers, Donald Trump primarily divided the nation on what the true narrative is. Oftentimes, he would claim anything other than what he said is fake news or a false narrative. One of the best examples that I use in my paper of this is the January 6th insurrection, right? And on that topic, he did not make an address to the nation. He made a social media video to Twitter telling his followers to go home. He also used social media to get these people to come to the Capitol because he was contesting the 2020 election. That in itself was a presidential spectacle. It was most definitely a spectacle at the United States nation's Capitol. But primarily, it was organized through social media. It was used through social media. And the ending point that I used in my paper about that was how he was able to send that message out through social media to the supporters to go home that will always be in our nation's history. He did not go to cable news. He did not go to a cable news broadcast. He used social media to do so. I'm hoping that with this presentation, I've given you somewhat of a crash course of what my paper is about and everything that I primarily mentioned. I'm sorry for my stuttering. I do that often when I'm recording myself. But if I can leave you with anything with the conclusion, right? 1988, Miroff's theory